The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air as Lisa wiped down another table at Romano's restaurant. Her feet ached in her worn-out sneakers, and she could feel the tiredness creeping up her legs. It was already 9 in the evening, and she still had 2 more hours left on her shift. This was her reality now, working 14-hour days just to make ends meet. Lisa had been doing this routine for 3 months straight. Wake up at 6 in the morning, rush to her first job at a local diner, then race across town to Romano's for the evening shift. Every day felt like a marathon, but she pushed through because she had a dream that kept her going. She wanted to become a music teacher, and community college was her stepping stone to that future. The restaurant was one of those fancy places where people came to celebrate special occasions. The walls were decorated with old Italian paintings, and soft lighting made everything feel warm and romantic. But what caught Lisa's attention every single night was the beautiful grand piano sitting in the corner. It was a stunning black instrument that seemed to call out to her whenever she walked past it. The piano had been there for years, collecting dust like a forgotten treasure. Nobody ever played it anymore. Lisa had asked Tony, the restaurant manager, about it once, and he just shrugged his shoulders. "Been there since before I started working here," he had said. The old owner left it behind when he sold the place. Every time Lisa cleaned the tables near that corner, she would slow down her pace. Her eyes would drift to the piano keys, and her fingers would unconsciously move as if she were playing an invisible melody. She missed playing so much it hurt. Back when her family had their own house, she had a small upright piano in her bedroom. She would spend hours practicing after school, losing herself in the music, but that felt like a lifetime ago. When her dad lost his job at the factory, everything changed overnight. They had to sell the house, the car, and yes, even her beloved piano. The family moved into a tiny apartment across town, and Lisa had to grow up fast. She took on jobs to help pay the bills while trying to keep up with her studies. The hardest part wasn't the long hours or the sore feet. It was the silence. Music had been her language, her way of expressing feelings she couldn't put into words. Now, the only melodies she heard were the ones playing softly in her head while she served plates of pasta and poured glasses of wine. This particular Friday night, Romano's was busier than usual. The weekend crowd always brought more customers, which meant more tips, but also more stress. Lisa was rushing between tables, taking orders, and making sure everyone had what they needed. Her notepad was full of scribbled requests, and her apron pockets jingled with coins and bills. Around 8:30, she noticed a man sitting alone at table 12, the corner table right next to the piano. He was probably in his 60s, wearing an expensive-looking suit and a gold watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. His gray hair was perfectly styled, and he had the kind of confidence that came from years of success. What struck Lisa as odd was that he had specifically requested that table. Most people wanted to sit in the center of the restaurant where they could see and be seen. But this gentleman seemed content in his quiet corner, occasionally glancing at the piano as if he were remembering something from long ago. Throughout the evening, Lisa found herself stealing glances at him. He wasn't like their usual customers, who came in loud groups or romantic couples lost in conversation. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, and he seemed to be watching everything around him with curious eyes. Most importantly, she noticed that whenever she walked past his table, he would look up from his meal and observe her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The man ordered simple things: a Caesar salad, chicken parmesan, and a single glass of red wine. But he made each course last, as if he wasn't in any hurry to leave. Lisa had served him politely, but she was too busy with other tables to pay much attention to any one customer. As the night wore on and the restaurant began to empty, Lisa started her closing routine. She collected dirty dishes, wiped down tables, and reset them for the next day. The familiar rhythm of closing time was actually relaxing after the chaos of dinner service. But she couldn't help noticing that the man at table 12 was still there, now nursing a cup of coffee. While cleaning a nearby table, Lisa found herself humming quietly. It was something she did without thinking, a habit from her piano-playing days. The melody was from a piece she used to love practicing, one that always made her feel peaceful even during stressful times. She didn't realize how carried away she got with her humming until she caught herself swaying slightly to the rhythm. That's when she looked up and saw the man watching her intently. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Lisa felt her cheeks turn red with embarrassment. She quickly looked away and focused on her cleaning, hoping he hadn't noticed her little musical moment, but he had noticed. And more than that, he had been paying attention to something else Lisa didn't realize she was doing. Every single time she passed by that piano, she would slow down just a little bit. Her eyes would drift to the keys, and sometimes her free hand would move as if she were playing notes only she could hear. The man's name was Vincent Romano, though Lisa didn't know this yet. What she also didn't know was that this wasn't a coincidence. Vincent had been coming to the restaurant for weeks, always sitting at different tables, always watching the staff work. He had a reputation in the city as someone who noticed things others missed, someone who could spot talent and potential in unexpected places. Vincent had built his fortune in real estate, but his real passion had always been music. His late wife had been a talented pianist, and some of his happiest memories were of listening to her play in the evenings after dinner. When she passed away 5 years ago, music had become both a source of comfort and pain for him. As Lisa continued her closing duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about tonight. The air seemed charged with possibility, though she couldn't explain why. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, a simple conversation would change the entire course of her life. The last customers were settling their bills and putting on their coats. The kitchen staff was beginning their cleanup, and Tony was counting the register. It was almost closing time, but Vincent remained at his table, seeming lost in thought as he stared at the piano. Lisa approached his table with a polite smile, ready to ask if he needed anything else or if he was ready for his check. She had no way of knowing that Vincent had been waiting for this exact moment, planning what he was going to say to the young woman who had unknowingly reminded him why music mattered so much. The stage was set for a conversation that would prove that sometimes the most ordinary nights can become extraordinary, and that dreams deferred are not always dreams denied. Lisa walked over to table 12 with her usual professional smile, her notepad ready in case the gentleman wanted to order dessert or another drink. The restaurant was much quieter now, with only a few tables still occupied. The soft jazz music playing in the background seemed louder somehow, filling the spaces between conversations. "Can I get you anything else this evening, sir?" she asked politely, standing beside his table. Up close, she could see that his expensive suit was perfectly tailored, and there was something about his presence that commanded respect. He wasn't just wealthy. He carried himself like someone who was used to making important decisions. Vincent looked up at her with sharp but kind eyes. Instead of answering her question right away, he surprised her by asking one of his own. "How long have you been working here?" Lisa blinked, not expecting such a personal question from a customer. "About 3 months now, sir." "Is everything okay with your service tonight?" "Everything's been perfect," Vincent said, leaning back in his chair. "I've been watching you work, and I have to say, you're very dedicated. Most young people your age don't have that kind of work ethic anymore." She felt a mix of pride and confusion. It was nice to be complimented, but she wasn't sure where this conversation was heading. "Thank you, sir. I just try to do my best." Vincent nodded slowly, then gestured toward the piano in the corner. "Tell me something. Do you play?" Lisa's heart skipped a beat. How could he possibly know? She glanced at the piano and then back at him, her cheeks turning slightly pink. "I used to." "Why do you ask?" Because every time you walk past that piano, you look at it like it's an old friend you haven't seen in years, Vincent said with a knowing smile. And just a few minutes ago, I heard you humming something beautiful while you were cleaning. That wasn't just random humming. That was someone who understands music. Lisa felt exposed, as if this stranger had seen right through her carefully constructed walls. She had tried so hard to focus on work and push her musical dreams to the back of her mind. But apparently, she hadn't been as successful at hiding her feelings as she thought. I used to play a lot, she admitted quietly. But that was a long time ago. How long is a long time? Vincent asked gently. Lisa hesitated. She didn't usually share personal information with customers, but something about this man made her feel like she could trust him. About 2 years. We had to sell our piano when my family went through some hard times. A look of understanding crossed Vincent's face. He had suspected there was a story behind the way she looked at that instrument, and now he was beginning to piece it together. That must have been difficult for you. It was, Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Music was everything to me. I was planning to major in music education, maybe teach kids someday. But life had other plans. Vincent was quiet for a moment, studying her face. He could see the pain there, but also something else, a spark that hadn't been completely extinguished. What if I told you that life might still have some surprises left for you? Before Lisa could ask what he meant, Vincent did something completely unexpected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp $500 bill. Lisa's eyes widened in shock. She had never seen that much money in cash before, let alone as a single bill. Here's what I'm thinking, Vincent said, placing the bill on the table between them. I'll make you a deal. If you can sit down at that piano and play something, anything that moves me, this money is yours. Lisa stared at the bill in disbelief. $500 would solve so many of her problems. It would cover her next semester's textbooks, help with rent, maybe even let her take a day off from her morning job. But the thought of playing in front of people terrified her. I couldn't possibly, she started to say. Wait, let me finish, Vincent interrupted gently. If you play and I'm not impressed, you don't owe me anything, not a penny. But you do have to tell me the real story of why you stopped playing music. Lisa's mind raced. This felt like some kind of dream or maybe a test. Who was this man? And why was he offering her so much money? Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I haven't played in 2 years. My fingers aren't what they used to be, and that piano probably hasn't been tuned in ages. Vincent chuckled softly. I'm not asking you to perform at Carnegie Hall. I just want to hear you play something that comes from your heart, something that matters to you. From across the restaurant, Tony looked up from the register and noticed the unusual scene. He had been managing Romano's for 5 years, and he had never seen a customer offer money to an employee like this. He started walking over, concerned that there might be some kind of problem. Everything all right over here? Tony asked, looking between Lisa and Vincent with a protective expression. He knew Lisa was a good kid who worked hard, and he didn't want anyone taking advantage of her. Vincent smiled at Tony. Everything's fine. I was just making a proposal to your talented waitress here. What kind of proposal? Tony asked suspiciously. Lisa quickly explained the situation, her voice shaking slightly. Tony's eyebrows shot up when he heard about the $500. He looked at Vincent with new respect, realizing this wasn't just any ordinary customer. You're serious about this? Tony asked Vincent. Completely serious, Vincent replied. I have a feeling your waitress here has been hiding her light under a bushel, as they say. Tony turned to Lisa. Do you want to do it? I mean, the piano's been sitting there for years. Nobody ever plays it anymore. Lisa looked at the piano, then at the money on the table, then at Vincent's encouraging face. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she could feel her heart beating faster. What if I embarrass myself? What if I've forgotten how to play? Then you'll know you tried, Vincent said simply. And sometimes that's all that matters. By now, the conversation had attracted the attention of the few remaining customers and some of the kitchen staff. Word was spreading that something interesting was happening at table 12. The restaurant's usual dinner atmosphere was shifting into something more electric, more anticipatory. I don't even know what to play, Lisa said, her voice filled with uncertainty. Play whatever speaks to you, Vincent encouraged. Play something that reminds you of why you fell in love with music in the first place. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her nerves. In her mind, she could hear echoes of all the pieces she used to play, the classical compositions that challenged her technique, the contemporary songs that made her feel connected to her generation, and the simple melodies that always brought her peace. When she opened her eyes, she saw that more people had gathered around. The remaining customers had stopped their conversations, and several staff members had emerged from the kitchen. Even the busboy had paused in his work to see what was happening. If I do this, Lisa said slowly, and it's terrible, you promise I won't owe you anything. Vincent nodded solemnly. You have my word. The only thing at risk here is the possibility of something beautiful happening. Lisa took a deep breath and looked at the piano one more time. After 2 years of silence, she was about to find out if the music was still inside her. Lisa stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the piano bench. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it. The restaurant had grown unusually quiet, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Even the soft background music seemed to have faded away, leaving only the sound of her own nervous breathing. I can't believe I'm doing this, she whispered to herself, slowly walking toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, like she was walking through thick mud. Her hands were shaking, and she wiped her palms on her apron, trying to get rid of the sweat that had suddenly appeared. The piano bench was old but sturdy, made of dark wood that matched the instrument itself. Lisa sat down carefully, adjusting her position the way her old piano teacher had taught her years ago. Sit up straight, feet flat on the floor, hands relaxed. She could hear Mrs. Peterson's voice echoing in her memory. She lifted the piano lid with trembling fingers. The keys looked exactly as she remembered from her childhood dreams, black and white, perfectly arranged, waiting for someone to bring them to life. But these keys were dusty and slightly yellowed with age. She wondered when the last time someone had played this beautiful instrument was. Take your time, Vincent called out softly from his table. His voice was encouraging, but Lisa could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Tony had moved closer, genuinely curious to see what would happen. He had known Lisa for 3 months, but he had never suspected she could play piano. She had always seemed like such a quiet, hard-working girl who kept to herself. The kitchen staff had gathered near the doorway to the dining room, their cleanup tasks temporarily forgotten. Lisa placed her fingers on the keys but didn't press down yet. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like when music flowed through her naturally. Back then, playing piano wasn't something she had to think about. It was like breathing or walking. The melodies would just come out of her, expressing feelings she couldn't put into words. What should I play? She asked herself silently. She thought about all the pieces she used to know by heart. There were the classical pieces she had learned for recitals, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. There were the popular songs she had taught herself by ear, the ones that made her feel connected to kids her own age. And then there were the simple, beautiful melodies that always calmed her down when life got overwhelming. Finally, she made her choice. She would play one of Chopin's pieces, a nocturne that had always been her favorite. It was the kind of music that could make you cry, even if you weren't sad. The kind that could make you remember every beautiful moment you had ever experienced. Lisa took a deep breath and pressed her fingers to the keys. The first note rang out, clear and pure, filling the restaurant with a sound it hadn't heard in years. The piano was surprisingly well-tuned, considering how long it had been sitting there. Lisa played the opening melody slowly, carefully, like she was greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in forever. But something magical started happening. As the familiar notes flowed from her fingers, 2 years of suppressed emotion began pouring out through the music. Her technique came back to her like riding a bicycle, once learned, never truly forgotten. Her fingers found their way across the keys with growing confidence, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. The melody was hauntingly beautiful. It started soft and gentle, like a whisper, then grew stronger and more confident. Lisa's whole body began to sway slightly with the rhythm, her eyes still closed, completely lost in the music. She wasn't in the restaurant anymore. She was back in her childhood bedroom, playing for the pure joy of creating something beautiful. Around the room, something extraordinary was happening. The few remaining customers had stopped their conversations completely. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Wine glasses sat untouched on tables. Even the busy sounds from the kitchen had gone completely silent. Vincent sat perfectly still at his table, but his eyes were wide with amazement. This wasn't just good piano playing. This was something special. The young woman at the piano was pouring her heart out through her fingertips, and the result was absolutely breathtaking. He could feel goosebumps rising on his arms as the melody reached its most emotional peak. Tony had never heard anything like this in his 5 years at Romano's. He found himself thinking that this was how the restaurant was supposed to sound. The piano had been sitting there like a beautiful piece of furniture, but now it was alive again, filling the space with warmth and emotion that no amount of fancy decorating could provide. In the kitchen, Carlos, the head chef, had put down his cleaning cloth and was leaning against the doorframe with tears in his eyes. Music had always moved him deeply, reminding him of his grandmother's singing back in his home country. Maria, one of the other waitresses, was standing with her hand over her heart, completely mesmerized. Lisa played on, unaware of the effect she was having on everyone around her. The nocturne had sections that were gentle and dreamy, followed by parts that were more intense and passionate. Her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence, executing runs and chord progressions that she hadn't attempted in 2 years. As the piece moved toward its climax, Lisa's playing became more powerful and expressive. She was no longer the nervous waitress who had been afraid to touch the keys. She was a musician again, connected to something larger than herself, channeling emotions that had been locked away for too long. The restaurant seemed to transform around her. The ordinary Friday night atmosphere had become something magical and unrepeatable. Strangers were sharing a moment of pure beauty, united by the universal language of music that speaks directly to the human soul. Vincent wiped a tear from his eye, remembering nights when his late wife would play for him after dinner. The music was different, but the feeling was exactly the same. That sense of being transported to a place where only beauty existed, where all the struggles and complications of daily life faded away. As Lisa approached the final section of the nocturne, her playing became softer again, more introspective. The melody seemed to float in the air, each note hanging there like a jewel before gently giving way to the next. Her technique was flawless, but more importantly, her emotion was completely genuine. The last few measures were played so softly they were almost whispers. Lisa's fingers moved delicately across the keys, bringing the piece to its peaceful conclusion. When the final note faded away, the silence that followed was profound and reverent. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The magic of what had just happened hung in the air like incense, too precious to disturb with applause or conversation. Then, slowly, Lisa opened her eyes and looked around the room. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person was staring at her with expressions of wonder and amazement. Some had tears in their eyes. Others were smiling with pure joy. The realization of what she had just done hit her all at once. and her hands began shaking again as she lifted them from the keys. The silence in the restaurant felt like it lasted forever, but it was actually only a few seconds before the room erupted in thunderous applause. Lisa sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She had expected polite clapping at best, maybe even some uncomfortable silence. But this was something entirely different. People were genuinely moved by what they had just heard. Tony was the first to speak, his voice filled with amazement. "Lisa, I had no idea you could play like that. That was absolutely incredible." The kitchen staff rushed out from behind their stations, all talking at once. Carlos wiped his eyes with his apron and said in his thick accent, "That was beautiful, Mia. You made this old man cry." Maria was beaming with pride as if Lisa were her own daughter. Even Jake, the teenage busboy who usually kept to himself, was staring at Lisa with newfound respect, but it was Vincent's reaction that caught everyone's attention. The distinguished gentleman had risen from his chair and was walking slowly toward the piano, his face showing an emotion that nobody could quite identify. It wasn't just appreciation or surprise. There was something deeper there, something personal. "Young lady," Vincent said, his voice slightly shaky, "that was extraordinary. But I need to ask you something. Where did you learn to play that particular piece?" Lisa looked up at him, still feeling dazed from the performance. "It's Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. I learned it from my piano teacher when I was 16. It was always my favorite piece to play when I needed to feel calm." Vincent's face went pale, and he had to steady himself by placing a hand on the piano. Everyone in the room noticed the sudden change in his demeanor, and the celebratory atmosphere shifted to one of concern and curiosity. "Are you all right, sir?" Lisa asked, starting to stand up from the piano bench. Vincent held up his hand, indicating he needed a moment. He walked around to the other side of the piano, running his fingers along its polished surface, as if he were touching something sacred. "This piano," he said quietly, "has a very special history." Tony stepped forward, intrigued. "What kind of history?" Vincent took a deep breath before continuing. 30 years ago, I owned this restaurant. Romano's was my pride and joy, a place where people came not just for good food, but for an experience they couldn't get anywhere else. And every Friday night, without fail, my wife would sit at this very piano and play for our guests." The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on Vincent's every word. Lisa felt her heart skip a beat as she began to understand that this wasn't just a random encounter. "Her name was Catherine," Vincent continued, his voice growing softer. "She was classically trained, could play anything by ear, but her absolute favorite piece was the same nocturne you just played. She said it reminded her of falling in love, gentle at first, then passionate, then peaceful at the end." Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief. Of all the pieces she could have chosen, she had picked the one that held the most meaning for this stranger, who had challenged her to play. Vincent walked back around the piano and sat down on a nearby chair, looking older and more vulnerable than he had just moments before. "Catherine got sick about 7 years ago. Cancer. The doctor said she had maybe 6 months, but she fought for 2 whole years. During that time, she couldn't come to the restaurant anymore, and the piano fell silent." The emotional weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Several people wiped away tears, understanding now why this moment was so significant. "After she passed away," Vincent continued, "I couldn't bear to be here anymore. Everything reminded me of her, especially that piano. So I sold the restaurant, but I kept ownership of the building. I told myself I would never come back, that it would be too painful." Lisa felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked at the piano keys with new understanding, realizing she had been playing an instrument that held someone's most precious memories. "But you did come back," Tony said gently. "Why now?" Vincent smiled sadly. "Because I've been lost without her. I threw myself into work, made more money than I knew what to do with, but nothing filled the emptiness. Then a few months ago, I started having dreams about this place, dreams where I could hear music coming from this piano again." He looked directly at Lisa with eyes that were both grateful and amazed. "I started coming here occasionally, sitting at different tables, trying to work up the courage to ask someone to play it. But every time I opened my mouth, I couldn't find the words. Until tonight." Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a beautiful woman with kind eyes and elegant hands seated at the very same piano. "This is Catherine on our 10th wedding anniversary. She played that same nocturne for me that night, and I told her it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard." Lisa took the photograph with trembling hands, studying the face of the woman who had once brought this piano to life. "She looks like she was a wonderful person." "She was," Vincent said, his voice full of love even after all these years. "And you know what the strangest part is? You play exactly like she did. Not just the technique, but the emotion behind it. When I closed my eyes just now, it was like she was here again, playing for all of us." The revelation hit everyone in the room like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just a random act of kindness from a wealthy man. This was a moment of healing, of connection across time and loss. Vincent stood up and walked back to his table, where the $500 bill still lay waiting. But instead of picking it up, he reached into his wallet and pulled out something else, a business card and what looked like a check. "Lisa," he said, turning back to face her, "I need to tell you something else. I didn't just stumble into this restaurant tonight. I've been watching you for weeks, coming in at different times, sitting at different tables. I could see something in your eyes every time you looked at that piano. I could see the music trapped inside you, waiting to get out." Lisa's mouth fell open in shock. "You've been watching me?" "Not in a creepy way," Vincent quickly clarified, seeing the alarm on everyone's faces. "I own several businesses in this city, and I've learned to recognize talent when I see it. But more than that, I've learned to recognize people who have given up on their dreams too early." He walked back toward her, holding the check in his hand. "This isn't just the $500 I promised you. This is something much bigger." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited to see what Vincent would reveal next. Lisa's hands were shaking as she realized that her entire life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. "What I'm about to offer you," Vincent said, "is a chance to get your dreams back. But first, I need to know, if you could do anything with your life, if money weren't an issue, what would you choose?" Lisa looked around the room at all the faces staring at her expectantly, then back at the piano that had just helped her rediscover a part of herself she thought was lost forever. The answer came to her clearly, without hesitation. "I would teach music to kids who can't afford lessons. And I would play piano every single day for the rest of my life." Vincent's eyes lit up when he heard Lisa's answer. He looked around the room at everyone's faces, then back at her with a smile that seemed to light up his entire being. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say." He held up the check he had been carrying, and Lisa could see numbers written on it that made her heart stop. It wasn't $500. It wasn't even $5,000. The check was made out for $50,000. "This is a scholarship," Vincent announced to the stunned room. "A full scholarship to any music school Lisa chooses. Enough to cover tuition, books, and living expenses while she gets her degree in music education." Lisa's legs gave out, and she had to sit back down on the piano bench. $50,000 was more money than her family had ever seen at one time. It was enough to completely change her life, to turn her impossible dreams into actual possibilities. "I don't understand," she whispered, staring at the check like it might disappear if she blinked. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Vincent sat down in the chair across from the piano, his expression becoming gentle and fatherly. "Because 30 years ago, Someone did something similar for Catherine. She came from a poor family, worked 3 jobs to pay for community college, and thought she would never afford music school. Then a wealthy patron heard her play at a small cafe and changed her entire life with one generous gesture. The room was completely silent as everyone absorbed this information. It was like watching a movie, except it was happening right in front of them in real life. Catherine always said that when you receive an unexpected gift, you have a responsibility to pass it forward when you can, Vincent continued. She made me promise that if I ever found someone with her kind of talent and heart, I would help them the way she was helped. Lisa was crying now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Then you'll have tried, Vincent said simply. And that's more than most people ever do with their dreams. Tony stepped forward, still amazed by everything he was witnessing. Sir, forgive me for asking, but are you really serious about this? $50,000 is a life-changing amount of money, Vincent chuckled softly. Tony, I've made more money in the last 5 years than I know what to do with. But you know what I learned? Money sitting in a bank account doesn't make anyone happy. Money that changes someone's life, now. That's worth something. He turned back to Lisa, who was still staring at the check in disbelief. But there's more. The scholarship is just the beginning. Lisa looked up at him with wide eyes. More? Vincent stood up and walked to the center of the room, addressing everyone present. I've been thinking about this for months, and tonight has convinced me it's the right decision. I'm going to reopen Romano's as a dinner theater. Live music every night, featuring talented local musicians who need a place to perform and earn money while they pursue their dreams. The excitement in the room was electric. Carlo started grinning and clapping his hands. Maria gasped and covered her mouth. Even Jake the busboy was smiling from ear to ear. And Lisa, Vincent said, turning back to her, I would like you to be our head pianist. You'll play 3 nights a week, which will give you a steady income while you're in school. The schedule will work around your classes, and you'll have the opportunity to mentor other young musicians who perform here. Lisa felt like she was dreaming. This morning, her biggest worry had been whether she could afford her textbooks for next semester. Now suddenly, she had a full scholarship, a job doing what she loved, and a chance to help other people the way Vincent was helping her. I need to call my parents, she said, her voice shaky with emotion. They're not going to believe this. Vincent smiled warmly. Please do. And tell them that if they'd like to come to the grand reopening in 2 months, they'll have reserved seats at the best table in the house. Tony was practically bouncing with excitement. This is incredible. Romano's is going to be the most popular restaurant in the city. Live music every night. People will be lining up around the block. That's the idea, Vincent said. But more importantly, it's going to be a place where music lives again. Where people come not just for food, but for an experience that touches their hearts. Lisa stood up from the piano bench and walked over to Vincent. Without hesitation, she hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. You've given me my life back. Vincent hugged her back, his own eyes misty with emotion. No, my dear, you've given me something too. You've reminded me why Catherine and I fell in love with this place. You've brought the music back. The entire staff gathered around them, everyone talking at once, asking questions about the reopening, volunteering to help however they could. The energy in the room was infectious. Everyone felt like they were part of something special, something that would be talked about for years to come. Carlos was already making plans for a special menu for the grand reopening. Maria was talking about how they could redecorate to accommodate the dinner theater setup. Jake was asking if he could learn to help with sound equipment. There's one more thing, Vincent said, raising his voice to get everyone's attention. Everyone who's working here tonight, everyone who witnessed this moment, You all have jobs in the new Romanos if you want them. Because you were part of making this magic happen." The cheer that went up from the staff could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Lisa looked around at all these people who had become like family to her over the past 3 months, and now they would all be part of her new adventure. As the excitement started to settle down, Vincent walked back to his table and picked up the original $500 bill. He handed it to Lisa with a wink. "This is for tonight's performance. Consider it your first payment as Romano's head pianist." Lisa took the money, but it felt almost meaningless compared to everything else that had happened. The scholarship, the job, the opportunity to pursue her dreams. It was all too wonderful to fully comprehend. "When do we start?" she asked, her voice full of determination and joy. "School applications are due next month," Vincent said. "I'll have my assistant help you with all the paperwork. As for Romano's, we'll start renovations next week. I want to have our grand reopening on the anniversary of the day Catherine and I first met, 8 weeks from tonight." As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Lisa sat back down at the piano. She played softly, just for herself. This time, letting her fingers wander over the keys while she processed everything that had happened. Vincent lingered at his table, listening to her play and watching her face. For the first time in 5 years, he felt truly at peace. Catherine would have loved Lisa, and she would have been so proud to see her piano bringing joy to people again. When Lisa finally closed the piano lid and stood up, she knew her life would never be the same. Tomorrow she would wake up not as a struggling waitress with impossible dreams, but as a music student with a bright future ahead of her. Sometimes, she thought, the most ordinary nights turn out to be the most extraordinary ones of all.